Legal System of Saudi Arabia by Emily Alvey. Saudi Arabia is governed by Islamic law, which is a sacred, non-secular law based on the rules and conduct revealed by God. Primary sources are the Sharia and the Sunnah. And in Saudi Arabia, religion is a way of life. It's not just a religious practice. It is unique because it is based on divine revelation rather than given by a ruler, and it is valid whether it is recognized by the state or not. It does not originate in customs or traditions, but rather in divine revelation, and it covers every aspect of the legal system, including personal law, constitutional law, international law, criminal law, mercantile law. The laws are found in the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book. During periods of colonialism in the Middle East, Islamic law was eclipsed by the laws and governments of the country in power. Islamic law generally lacks the power of government to enforce its sanctions, so it heavily depends on voluntary obedience, and there are 4 major schools of Islamic law. Saudi Arabia follows the fundamentalist Hanbali school, which is named after Ahmed Hanbal, who was a theologian and jurist. Here's some demographic information on Saudi Arabia. It is a very large country with a relatively small population comparatively. It is a non-constitutional monarchy, which consists of 13 provinces. It's mostly uninhabited desert, and has about 1/5 the population of the United States. It's the second largest petroleum reserve in the world and the world's leading exporter in oil, which provides most of the government revenue. It is a welfare state, so the government plays a key role in the protection and promotion of citizens' economic and social well-being. And in Saudi Arabia, there are very strict limitations on behavior and dress. The history of Saudi Arabia, the modern nation has only existed since 1926. It does include the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, which are very important to the Islamic faith. Prior to the 13th century rise of the Ottoman Empire, it was ruled by Islamic caliphs. And then the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia came to be after the conquest of warring factions supported by British troops. It was largely nomadic tribes until the discovery of oil in 1932. And then in 1993, a document called the Basic Law of Government was introduced outlining the government's rights and responsibilities. Each province is run by a governor who is under the Minister of the Interior, but often report directly to the king. The king is the chief of state and the head of the government. 25 men make up the Council of Ministers, and these men are chosen by the king to assist him. In fact, many of the highest officials, including the police and judicial systems, are related to the king. And legislation is enacted by resolution of the Council of Ministers and ratified by royal decree. And this is the current king of Saudi Arabia, pictured here. The Consultative Council was formed in 1992 by the king in attempts to westernize elements of the country. It's made up of 150 members, all appointed by the king. It is an advisory body with no legislative functions, but can propose new or amend legislation. And as of September 25th, 2011, a royal decree also gave women the right to become members of this council, beginning in the 2015 elections. There are a number of different crimes associated with the Islamic law system in Saudi Arabia. The first type is the Hudud crimes, which are crimes against God. These are very serious crimes considered violations of the natural law. These include robbery, theft, blasphemy, apostasy, rebellion, defamation, drug offenses, and sexual crimes such as adultery, sodomy, and fornication. The state must initiate prosecution in these crimes. There are also Tezarat crimes, which include manslaughter, murder, and assault. And typically victims or heirs bring a complaint and serve as prosecutor, although in more modern practice, the state initiates the proceedings once the complaint is brought by victims or heirs. Aside from issues of property, contracts, and inheritance, Islamic law also covers aspects of individual behavior such as dress, food, etiquette, and religious worship. This is particularly important pertaining to women's rights. Women in Saudi Arabia do not count as witnesses for certain crimes, or they count half as much as male witnesses. So you would need 2 women witnesses to equal 1 male witness. Women in Saudi Arabia cannot marry, divorce, travel, get a job, or have elective surgery without permission from a male guardian. There are also restrictive guardianship laws that require permission or supervision by a male relative at all times. Women cannot apply for an ID or passport without male permission. They cannot go out in public without being completely covered. And women cannot retain custody of their children after a divorce. There have been some strides in Saudi Arabia as to what women can do. As of 2015, women in Saudi Arabia can vote in local elections and campaign for public office. They aren't allowed to speak to any male voters when they vote, and there cannot be any gender mixing in campaign offices if they are campaigning. As of 2011, it was ordered by the king that at least 20% of seats on the Consultative Council be held by women. Women in Saudi Arabia can attend university, and in fact, a study showed that there are more women attending college in Saudi Arabia than there are men. And they can drive. As of June of 2018, coming up here in about a month and a half, Saudi Arabia passed a law allowing women to drive themselves, and it does go in effect this June. The problem with finding crime statistics in Saudi Arabia is threefold. It's almost impossible to compare crime statistics in Saudi Arabia to other countries due to the fact that the laws encourage informal, non-legalistic responses to criminal behavior, and few cases are actually handled by police or the courts. Crime statistics are also measured over a calendar year, and this poses a problem because Saudi Arabia uses the Arabic lunar calendar, which is based on the Islamic year, which has 354 days, where other countries use the Gregorian calendar, which has 365 days. And then there's also issues surrounding social policy and government information not being made public, and it's in fact pretty secretive. What we do know is that crime is very low in Saudi Arabia, lower than even other comparable Islamic countries. The homicide rate is less than 1 per 100,000, and rape, robbery, and auto theft are also extremely low. One of the big problems in Saudi Arabia is revolving around human trafficking. Saudi Arabia is a destination for human trafficking in men, for trafficking in men and women. Many people from other countries come to Saudi Arabia because it is very prosperous with the oil, and they hope to find a job, but they end up being forced into involuntary servitude and sexual slavery. The UN classifies Saudi Arabia as a Tier 3 country in regards to human trafficking, which means that the government does not fully comply with the Trafficking in Persons Act minimum standards and are not making any significant efforts to do so. Another issue in Saudi Arabia is terrorism. There are 2 main types of attacks associated with Saudi Arabia. There are attacks directed at the United States, such as 9/11. Osama bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia. And then there's also terrorist attacks directed at Saudi institutions and government offices. Mostly by Islamic fundamentalists such as Al-Qaeda, aimed at protecting religion from secularism and cultural imperialism of Western countries. The police force in Saudi Arabia is highly centralized. The police are under the authority of the Director of Public Safety. Local police are under the direct command of provincial governors who answer to that Director of Public Safety. And the Director of Public Safety is under the supervision of the Minister of the Interior. The Minister of the Interior, again, is appointed by the King and controls all police forces in Saudi Arabia. There are 3 main kinds of police. Saudi has regular police, and then these 2 that are listed here that I dare not try to pronounce. And then there's also a festival police as well. The regular police are part of the Department of Public Safety and handle most of the daily deviance and order control in Saudi Arabia. The Pilgrims and Festival Police Force are a special forces division that handles civil order and control functions during the annual pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. Their job is to maintain order, sanitary conditions, and oversee food distribution for the 2 million plus Muslims that come from around the world each year. they do riot control, and when issues become too big for them during these times, then National Guard or the Saudi Army are called in. This type of police is a secret police that conducts criminal investigations, handles matters pertaining to domestic security and counterintelligence as well. This type of police is a morals force or religious police and ensures Saudi people live up to the rules and behavior laid out in the Quran. They are known as the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, made up of 20,000 men who are not armed, not in uniform, and not trained as law enforcement. They enforce the strict gender separation, stopping women from driving cars, ensure women adhere to the strict dress requirements, and also ensure businesses close during prayer hours. They cover and remove advertisements that display attractive women and regulate alcohol use, which is banned in Saudi Arabia due to the religion. They are often left to their own interpretation of right and wrong, so there are numerous reports of mistreatment and harassment, especially of women and foreigners. And the Human Rights Watch has reported in 2005 that these forces were responsible for arresting 400,000 people for religious violations. Criminal procedure investigation is either done by private citizen or investigator can initiate, whether it's police force, and then prosecutable offenses are handed over to a judge. The accused has the right to defend themselves and the right to counsel during an investigation and trial, and a public defender is appointed if needed. The accused does not have the right to remain silent, but they do not have to tell the truth. There is no trial by jury. It is an inquisitorial system, so there is, it's pretty much up to a judge. And then bail is only granted for non-serious crimes. There have been some criticisms of Saudi Arabia's criminal procedure. The Human Rights Watch has put out a yearly report accusing Saudi Arabia of violating international standards of criminal procedure, including arbitrary arrests, use of detention without trial, secretive criminal justice systems, and violations related to cruel punishment. And foreigners do not seem to have the same rights and are often denied the right to counsel. There are general courts that handle traffic cases, personal courts that handle divorce cases, criminal courts have specialized circuits. Some do Haddad cases, some do the Tazir cases, juvenile cases, etc. The superior courts, the king may make decrees to supplement the law when it is called for. The king is the highest court of appeal. He has the power to pardon accused. Judges are appointed by the king and sit on religious courts. The Ministry of Justice presides over the judicial system. A judicial council made up of primarily of religious leaders reconcile the conflicts between traditional Islamic law and modern requirements, which we saw a lot with the transition of the introduction of oil. And then there's also a Supreme Judicial Council and a High Judiciary Council that assists the king. Corrections. Saudi Arabia mostly uses harsh corporal punishments, such as the removal of hands and feet, capital punishment. Incarceration is only used as a last resort. The correctional system is under the authority of the Director of Public Safety within the Office of the Bureau of Prisons. And I do warn you that there may be some graphic images on these next slides. Haddad penalties are designed to avoid unreasonable limitations to individual freedom. They cause momentary severe physical pain that remains unforgettable to the criminal, that hopefully deters him from participating in further criminal conduct. This is believed to be more effective than imprisonment, which loses its deterrent effect over time, and it also allows the accused to continue to be a productive member of society and support his family. Saudi Arabia is one of the top 3 countries known for executions. Beheading is the preferred method of execution, but stoning and firing squad are also methods used for execution. 47% of all executions are drug-related crimes, so recently more than half of executions done in Saudi Arabia are done for non-lethal crimes, including adultery, armed robbery, apostasy, and drug-related offenses. Juvenile offenders are executed in Saudi Arabia, which violates the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. They are not required to notify family in the event of an execution and often don't return the body. Those with mental illness are not spared from the death penalty, and executions are public. Stoning is a form of punishment, and it's the punishment for adultery, and you get stoned to death, but it does have some pretty high burden of proof, so it's not practiced frequently. I'll end with my references, and thank you for watching.